Picture this. It's 1561 in the magnificent Topkapi Palace. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the most powerful ruler on earth, holds his newborn son for the first time. The baby's name? Bayezid. This child would grow up to be brave, charismatic, loved by the people. He would also become his father's greatest heartbreak, because 21 years later, Suleiman would order the execution of this same son, along with Bayezid's 5 innocent children. The youngest? Just 3 years old. This is the story of a father who chose empire over family, a brother who fought brother, and a prince who learned too late that defying a sultan, even if that sultan is your father, always ends the same way. Bayezid was born into unimaginable privilege. His father was Suleiman the Magnificent, the sultan who had conquered half of Europe. His mother was Sultan, one of the most powerful women in history, a former slave who became the legal wife of the sultan, breaking centuries of tradition. But here's the thing about being an Ottoman prince. Your childhood is basically a countdown to either absolute power or certain death. There's no middle ground. Bayezid had brothers, lots of them initially. But one by one they died, some from illness, some from mysterious circumstances. By the time Bayezid was a teenager, only 2 brothers remained: Mustafa, the eldest and most beloved, and Selim, who everyone called Selim the drunk. And here's where it gets complicated. Because their father, Suleiman, had to choose which son would inherit the greatest empire on earth. Mustafa was the golden child. Tall, handsome, brave, intelligent, everything a sultan should be. The army loved him, the people loved him. Even foreign ambassadors wrote home saying, "This prince will be a great sultan." There was just one problem. Sultan hated him. Why? Because Mustafa wasn't her son. He was born to another woman, Mahidevran, and wanted her sons, Bayezid and Selim, to inherit the throne. So whispered in Suleiman's ear, day after day, year after year. "Mustafa is too popular," she said. "The army loves him more than they love you. He's dangerous. He'll rebel. He'll take your throne." Was it true? Probably not. But paranoia is a hell of a drug, especially when you're an aging sultan watching your eldest son become more popular than you. In 1553, Suleiman summoned Mustafa to his campaign tent. Mustafa came suspecting nothing. He walked into that tent, and he never walked out. Deaf, mute executioners strangled him with a bowstring while his father watched from behind a curtain. The army wept. The empire was shocked. And Bayezid? He was horrified and terrified, because now there were only 2 brothers left. Bayezid and Selim couldn't have been more different. Selim was, let's be honest, kind of a disaster. He was fat, he drank heavily, he had no military experience, and he showed 0 interest in actually governing. His nickname, Selim the Sot, tells you everything you need to know. The people didn't respect him. The army didn't trust him. But Suleiman liked him. Why? Maybe because Selim was safe. He wasn't ambitious. He wasn't threatening. He just wanted to drink wine and be left alone. Bayezid, on the other hand, was everything Mustafa had been. Brave, charismatic, militarily skilled. The kind of prince who could actually lead the empire. The army started gathering around him. The people whispered that he should be Sultan instead of his useless brother. Sound familiar? It should. Because Bayezid was making the exact same mistake Mustafa had made, being too popular. Sultan had died by this point, but her legacy lived on. Suleiman, had already decided. Selim would be Sultan, not Bayezid, and nothing was going to change his mind. But Bayezid refused to accept it. He looked at his brother, this drunk, incompetent man, and thought, the empire deserves better. I deserve better. So he did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. He rebelled. This is where it gets really tragic, because we're not talking about a prince rebelling against a tyrant. We're talking about a son fighting his own father. In 1559, Bayezid gathered his supporters, and he had many, and marched against Selim. The two brothers met at Konya, in central Anatolia. Brother versus brother, army versus army, the empire tearing itself apart. Selim's forces, backed by their father's authority and resources, were stronger. The battle was brutal, and Bayezid lost. Not just lost. He was crushed. His army scattered, his supporters fled, and suddenly, Bayezid found himself a rebel prince with a death sentence on his head. He had three choices: surrender and beg for mercy, which meant certain death. Keep fighting, which meant certain death. Run, which meant, probably, still death, but at least not immediately. He chose option 3. Bayezid gathered his 4 sons, yes, 4 young boys, and whatever loyal followers remained. They fled east, toward the only place that might offer sanctuary, Persia. Can you imagine? A prince of the Ottoman Empire, one of the most powerful dynasties on earth, reduced to a refugee, begging for protection from his father's greatest enemy. The journey was brutal. They crossed mountains, deserts, hostile territories. Bayezid's pregnant wife gave birth during the escape, their 5th child, a boy named Cihangir. Born on the run, born into exile. When they finally reached Persia in 1560, Bayezid threw himself at the mercy of Shah Tahmasp, the Persian ruler. "Protect me," he begged. "My father wants me dead." And Tahmasp said yes. At first, for nearly 2 years, Bayezid and his sons lived in Persia. Not in prison exactly, but not free either. More like very expensive hostages. Because Shah Tahmasp wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what Bayezid was worth. The Ottoman Empire and Persia had been enemies for decades. Having the Sultan's rebellious son was the ultimate bargaining chip. Back in Istanbul, Suleiman was getting old. He was in his 60s now, ancient by 16th century standards. He'd already lost so many sons, some to death, some to his own paranoia. And now his remaining son, Bayezid, was in enemy hands. A father might have felt relief, maybe even hope for reconciliation. But Suleiman the Magnificent wasn't thinking like a father anymore. He was thinking like a sultan. And a sultan can't have a rival prince sitting in enemy territory, potentially raising an army, potentially starting a war. So Suleiman made a deal with the devil. He sent ambassadors to Persia with a simple message: "Give me my son. Name your price." The negotiations took months. In the end, the price was astronomical: 400,000 gold pieces, the largest bribe in Ottoman history. Shah Tahmasp took the money and sealed Bayezid's fate. September 25th, 1561. Qazvin, Persia. Persian executioners came for Bayezid and his sons. Not Ottoman executioners. Tahmasp didn't want the blood directly on Ottoman hands, even though everyone knew who had ordered it. Bayezid fought. Of course he fought. He was a warrior, a prince, a father. But what can one man do against an army? They held him down. They made him watch. One by one, they strangled his 4 sons. Mustafa, age 10. Osman, age 8. Mahmud, age 6. Abdullah, age 5. 4 little boys. Gone. The baby, 3-year-old Cihangir, the one born during the escape, he went last. Some accounts say he was so small they had trouble finding a cord thin enough. Only after his children were dead did they finally strangle Bayezid himself. 5 bodies, 5 coffins, sent back to the Ottoman Empire like packages, like cargo. Suleiman had them buried in Sivas, far from the imperial capitals, not in the grand mausoleums reserved for princes, just graves, almost anonymous. Suleiman lived 5 more years after ordering his son's execution, 5 years to think about what he'd done, 5 years to remember that he'd now killed 2 of his own sons, Mustafa and Bayezid. Court records from those final years describe him as increasingly withdrawn, depressed, haunted. He barely spoke. He barely ate. The man who had conquered Europe couldn't conquer his own guilt. When he died in 1566, during a military campaign in Hungary, some wondered if part of him wanted to die on the battlefield, anything to escape the ghosts. And who became Sultan? Selim. Selim the drunk. The son who survived not because he was the best, but because he was the least threatening. He ruled for 8 unremarkable years, drank himself to death, and left the empire to his son. History remembers Suleiman as the Magnificent, the great conqueror, the lawgiver, one of the greatest sultans in Ottoman history. But magnificence has a price, and sometimes that price is paid in your children's blood. So here's what we're left with. Was Suleiman right? From a political standpoint, maybe? Bayezid had rebelled. He'd raised an army against his own brother. In the brutal logic of empire, he had to die. But the children? 4 little boys who'd done nothing except be born to the wrong father? The baby who never even knew what a rebellion was? There's no political justification for that. That's just murder. And here's the really heartbreaking part. Bayezid probably would have been a better sultan than Selim. He was braver, smarter, more capable. The empire might have been greater under his rule. But he committed the same sin his brother Mustafa had committed. He was too good at being a prince, too popular, too threatening. In the Ottoman Empire, being the best candidate for sultan was often the surest way to never become one. Today, if you visit Sivas in Turkey, you can find the graves. They're not grand, they're not famous. Most tourists don't even know they're there. 5 graves, a father and his 4 sons, killed on the same day, buried together in exile. There's a Turkish saying, "The fish rots from the head." It means that when leadership is corrupt, everything beneath it suffers. But maybe in this case, the saying should be different. The empire that eats its children will eventually starve. Because after Suleiman, the Ottoman Empire never quite reached the same heights again. Oh, it lasted for centuries more. But that golden age, that magnificent era, it died with princes like Bayezid. Maybe that's the real tragedy. Not just that a father killed his son, but that an empire destroyed its own best hope for the future. All because of paranoia, politics, and the deadly math of succession. If this story of betrayal, ambition, and family tragedy moved you, if you're sitting there thinking about the impossible choices between power and family, hit that like button. Because history isn't just about the glorious victories, it's about the heartbreaking costs of those victories. And here's the thing. Bayezid's story is just one of many. The Ottoman Empire has centuries of these tragic tales. Brothers betraying brothers, fathers killing sons, power corrupting absolutely everything it touches. We're uncovering them all, one story at a time. So if you want more content that makes you question everything you thought you knew about history, the real stories behind the empire, the human cost of greatness, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment. Was Suleiman right to execute his son? Could Bayezid have done anything differently? What would you have done? Thanks for watching. And remember, history's greatest empires were built on mountains of tragedy. The question is, was it worth it?